It's Christmas Eve, 1944. Snow falls over a shattered Belgian town called Bastogne. The air stinks of smoke, blood, and burning rubber. In a makeshift aid station, wounded American soldiers scream and groan on the floor. The doctor is overwhelmed. Nurses are collapsing from exhaustion. And into this chaos walks a quiet, young woman from the Congo. She is not a soldier. She is not even officially a nurse. But in the next days, she will make a choice so dangerous that, for decades, almost no one would believe it had even happened. This is the forgotten story of Augusta Chiwy, the woman who defied racism, war, and fear itself, armed with nothing but courage and a nurse's uniform that wasn't even hers. Welcome to the Untold Spirit. To understand Augusta's story, we have to step back, far away from the snow and the shells. Augusta Chiwy was born in the Belgian Congo in the early 1920s. Her father was Belgian, her mother Congolese, a mixed-race child in a world that didn't quite know where to place her. As a girl, Augusta was sent to Belgium for schooling. She grew up in a small, conservative society where her skin color made her stand out in every classroom and every street. Despite this, she sought a quiet life. She trained as a nurse's aide, lived modestly, and later moved to the town of Bastogne to work as a medical assistant. She wasn't looking for heroism. She wasn't chasing history. All she wanted was to live, to work, and to belong. But history was not done with her. By late 1944, World War II was grinding toward its brutal conclusion. The Allies had landed in Normandy. The Germans were retreating, or so everyone thought. Then came the surprise. In December 1944, Adolf Hitler launched one last desperate offensive on the Western Front, the Battle of the Bulge. German forces smashed through the Ardennes, and the quiet town of Bastogne suddenly found itself encircled, cut off, under siege. The skies were gray, supplies were low, the temperature plummeted, and Augusta Chiwy was right in the middle of it. As German shells rained down on Bastogne, chaos consumed the town. Airborne troops dug in around the perimeter, holding a shrinking circle against overwhelming odds. Inside that circle, the wounded began to pile up. The hospitals were bombed or overflowing. Churches, schools, basements, anything with four walls became a makeshift aid station. Augusta's own life could have followed a very different path here. She could have stayed hidden in a cellar. She could have tried to escape. She could have said, "This isn't my war." Instead, she made a different choice. One day, a doctor named John Pryor was desperately searching for anyone who could help treat the wounded. A Belgian acquaintance told him about a young woman in town who had medical training. A colored girl, he reportedly said in language of the time. Dr. Pryor found Augusta. He explained the situation. Hundreds of wounded, no staff, no supplies. He asked for help. Think about this moment. Augusta was a black woman in 1940s Europe, doubly marginalized, caught in the middle of someone else's war. She owed these soldiers nothing. Yet she agreed. She walked with Dr. Pryor through shell fire to a makeshift aid station. It was so close to the front lines that at times the windows rattled with nearby explosions. Inside, the scene was hellish. Soldiers lay on the floor, on tables, on doors ripped from their hinges, blood soaked into straw. Bandages were improvised from torn sheets. The smell of gangrene and burned flesh clung to the air. Augusta put on a nurse's uniform and set to work. Hour after hour, day after day, she tended to the wounded, cleaning wounds, holding down screaming men during amputations, comforting those who knew they would not survive.
As the siege continued, this small aid station became a fragile island of humanity in a sea of violence. Then, the unthinkable happened. On Christmas Eve, 1944, Augusta was on duty at the aid station. Outside, the world was frozen, a bitterly cold night, quiet in that deceptive way battlefields sometimes are between barrages. Then came the sound, the distant drone of aircraft, the whistle of falling bombs. A flight of German planes unleashed their payload on Bastogne. One of the bombs struck terrifyingly close to the aid station. The building exploded into chaos. Walls crumbled, glass shattered, flames shot upward. Screams filled the air, not just from the wounded, but from the nurses and staff. Augusta, thrown to the ground by the blast, somehow survived. When she pushed herself up, dazed and half-deaf, the scene around her was worse than anything she had yet witnessed. The place of healing had become another battlefield. Some of the wounded who had survived days of fighting were killed instantly by the bomb. Others were now burned, bleeding, or trapped under debris. Augusta could have staggered away. She could have run finally to safety. Instead, she helped pull survivors from the wreckage. Witnesses later recalled a small, dark-skinned woman moving through the smoke, refusing to stop, refusing to surrender to fear. She helped Dr. Pryor set up yet another makeshift station in a cellar behind. There, with even fewer supplies and under constant threat, they continued to treat the endless stream of shattered bodies. Augusta reportedly went outside again and again to bring in wounded men, crossing exposed streets under shell fire, ignoring both the danger and the prejudice that had shaped so much of her life. One American officer would later say, "She did more than most soldiers." But here's the twist. For decades after the war, almost no one knew her name.
When the war ended, the world rushed to honor its heroes. Generals, commanders, famous units. Medals were penned. Statues were raised. Books were written. Augusta Chiwy returned to a quieter life. She continued working in healthcare. She lived modestly, almost anonymously, in Belgium. The trauma of what she had seen and done in Bastogne stayed mostly locked inside her. Some say she didn't speak much about it. Others suggest she wasn't believed, or that there was simply no space in the grand narrative of the war for a mixed-race woman from the Congo who had saved American lives. For a very long time, her story was almost lost. It wasn't until the early 21st century that an American historian researching the Battle of the Bulge began to connect the fragments. Accounts of a black nurse at Bastogne, a mysterious woman who had worked with Dr. Pryor. He tracked Augusta down in Belgium. By then, she was an elderly woman, living in a nursing home. When he asked about Bastogne, the memories came back, quietly, painfully. The terror, the screams, the bomb on Christmas Eve, and the choice to walk into the fire rather than away from it. Eventually, Augusta Chiwy was formally recognized. She received honors from the United States and Belgium for her bravery and service. A documentary told her story. For a brief moment, the world looked back and saw her. But the question remains, why did it take us so long? Maybe because Augusta doesn't fit our usual image of heroism. She was not a decorated officer, not a famous commander. She was a woman of color in a foreign land, fighting not with weapons, but with bandages and bare hands. Yet this is exactly what the Untold Spirit is about. The courage that history almost forgot. The people who stood in the worst moments of darkness and said quietly, "I will help.
Augusta Chiwy's story reminds us that heroism is not always loud. It is often unseen, unrecorded, uncelebrated. But in a frozen town under siege in the winter of 1944, the untold spirit of one woman shone so brightly that even decades later, we can still feel its warmth. If you found strength in Augusta's story, imagine how many others are still hidden in the shadows of history. This is the Untold Spirit. If you want more forgotten stories like this, consider subscribing, and let me know in the comments which hidden chapter of history you want us to uncover next.